Yes, we're going to be simultaneously on YouTube and Facebook.
Okay.
And do that. Okay, John, you're live. Okay.
Hello and welcome to another virtual author event at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles, and the Poison Pen is very fortunate to have with us today author Claudia Gray, whose new book is The Murder of Mr. Wickham. Now, before we begin, for those tuning in, I do want to let them know that we have copies of The Murder of Mr. Wickham available for purchase at the Poison Pen, and we would be delighted to hold one or put one in the mail for you. Just give us a call or go online and we can make that happen. Now I would like to welcome Claudia.
Hi there.
It's wonderful to have you here. I always love learning a little bit about an author before they were a writer. And if I understand correctly, you wanted to be a writer, but when you were growing up, creative writing options were somewhat limited and you weighed the economic costs and benefits of that as a career.
That's such a mature way to put it. I wish that had been the thought process. It was more, I went to a very small school. We didn't have any creative writing classes or anything like that. I didn't get into them in college. I was already intimidated that everybody else had a head start. And, again, nobody ever discouraged me. But you just didn't hear a whole lot of like, yes, this is definitely a path you should set out on. So I didn't write at all for a long time. And then I was purely a hobby writer for another long time.
Would it be fair to say that we can blame your initial foray into writing on the X-Files?
Absolutely, yes. And it's also important, like this is just when mass use of the internet was happening, which of course was part of the reason the X-Files hit the way it did. It was the first show that people sort of congregated to talk about together online. And it was very obvious to me, and I think to others, that Mulder and Scully should kiss, and they kept on not doing that. And when I got on the internet, I discovered other people felt the same way, and some of them wrote stories about it. And so I got started. My first several stories were not very good at all. But, I didn't have any sense of this sort of barrier to entry because there isn't one with fan fiction as opposed to professional published fiction. So I felt free to just jump in. And as it happened, I kept at it and actually wanted to make it better. And, many millions literally of words later, it did get better.
Yeah, I was fascinated by this part of your career because I was not aware of fan fiction. I wasn't something I knew of at the time. For those of us like myself who perhaps are more from Jane Austen's era, can you kind of explain what fan fiction is?
To some extent, I believe it's always existed in terms of people telling new stories about existing characters. I mean, if you think back, there's not one version of the Greek myths. People embroidered on that story, and there are different things that happen to Heracles over time. That's different people came up with ideas and did that. There's not one version of the Arthurian myths. People in that era, in those countries, well, there was room to weave in another knight or another quest, another adventure. And the ones that survived, the ones that we love the most, those are the ones that get handed down to us, even though they don't really necessarily agree with each other. So I do think it's a very important storytelling impulse. We hear a story, we say, what's next? Or what did that third character think? What did they do? Etc. As for fan fiction in sort of the modern form, it dates closer to Jane Austen's time, the beginning of it, than our own. Sherlock Holmes was really one of the big entry points for that. People loved to come up with other things that Sherlock Holmes might do. Wow. And back then people sort of formed little societies and there were little letters that would come out, but that is sort of where it began to percolate. It got another really big boost with Star Trek in the 1960s. That, I think, began to really get larger communities tied together. And then once you had the X-Files and the internet, everything exploded. And what is it? The Archive of Our Own, which is, I think, the principal fan fiction archive that's out there. I think it's something like the third or fourth busiest site on the net,
Wow.
in the world. It has been discovered.
So you were writing fan fiction and eventually you became published. Your first
Mhm.
book came out in 2007, I believe.
2008,
2008. Okay. You've written YA novels since then.
mostly, yes.
And you've also kind of done some work in the Star Wars world.
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. So far, before Wickham, my only adult books were in the Star Wars universe, but
Okay.
Wickham gets me to a fully adult novel that is not a genre tie-in. Of course, it does deal with somebody else's characters. Again, I seem to have a theme here, but
I believe you said that writing Star Wars books and fan fiction gave you the tools to write The Murder of Mr. Wickham because you had kind of dealt with other people's characters, other worlds. Is that kind of a fair assessment?
I do think that's true. I mean, it's not all of the tools, but listening for a very particular character voice is an
Mhm.
important thing if you're going to write other person's characters well, whether that's as a professional author doing Star Wars tie-ins or in fan fiction. You want to capture that kind of note in the dialogue, the cues that indicate sort of the movement, the distinctiveness of a character. And you pay a lot of attention to how scenes are set, how information is introduced, this sort of thing. It sort of forms the template of pretty much any media you may consume, whether that's a book or a movie or a television show or really anything. There's fan fiction about everything.
Fascinating. Now, you've had the idea for The Murder of Mr. Wickham for years, but if I understand correctly, it was reading P.D. James' Death Comes to Pemberley that kind of pushed you into thinking about writing it.
Actually, that was where the idea came from,
Oh,
because when it was Death Comes to Pemberley, when I first heard about it, first of all, I love P.D. James.
yeah.
I first hear about this book, I think, it's going to be Wickham. Somebody's going to have killed Wickham. I mean, just list the suspects. There's so many from that book. Anyway, we get there and spoilers, but this book has been out for about a decade, so I don't feel too bad about it. The person who dies is Denny.
Mhm.
And I was not that interested in who killed Denny. It was a really interesting look at that world, and particularly in terms of the forensics
Oh,
of that era and the legal minutia of how things were handled then. You know, the first thing they do is move the body because, of course, it has to be taken to a more appropriate place, et cetera. So, you know, I realized sort of I was caught short, not by the book itself, which is excellent, but because I built up this other idea in my head of the book. And over time, you know, it's sort of, of course it should have been Wickham because this or that or that. And then finally I realized, you know, I wasn't griping about the book I had expected to read. I was starting to plot a book I wanted to write. And it took a little while to really come to germination. And then I think it was sort of winter 2019. I actually was being very self-indulgent with myself. I just thought, you know what, I've always wanted to do that. I'm just going to make the time. I really was not at all sure that it would find a publisher, to tell you the truth, but I'd been carrying around the idea for too long. It had to get onto the paper somehow.
So we come to The Murder of Mr. Wickham. Can you kind of tell those listening in a little bit about the book, maybe kind of your movie trailer version of what happens?
In a world where, no. Let's see, there is a house party being held at Donwell Abbey that brings together characters from, or at least connected to, each of Jane Austen's 6 completed novels. Obviously, our hosts are Emma and Mr. Knightley. Mr. Wickham, uninvited, shows up as well. And in the classic tradition of Austen's rogues, who tend to have more sneaky connections than we realize at first glance, he turns out to not only be tied to, but have really wronged pretty much everyone in attendance. Not everybody, but almost everybody. Well, he meets his terrible end late one night. The only 2 people that are known not to have done it among the guests are Juliet Tilney, who is the 16-year-old daughter of Catherine Morland and Henry Tilney from Northanger Abbey, and Jonathan Darcy, who is, of course, the son of Darcy and Elizabeth, who are also in attendance. He's about 20. Because they know that they're innocent, and because they can tell that the local authorities are pinning the blame or wanting to pin the blame on a servant or a vagrant, somebody who won't really have any way of defending themselves, they feel they have to get to the truth. So they begin sleuthing, and that is where our story begins.
It's a wonderful book. You really spoil readers with the number of possible suspects as to who wanted to kill Wickham. What I also love is you had to work with a lot of Austen's established characters from all of her novels, but you also created two of your own, Juliet and Jonathan. And in some ways, Jonathan was fascinating because he's like Darcy, his father. He's got that standoffish kind of quality, but you kind of provide a rationale for his behavior that will also resonate with modern readers because we understand more about human behavior. Can you talk about Jonathan and how you came to create him?
Right. My first thought when writing Jonathan was just, he's more Darcy than Darcy. But as I began working on it, I had to ask why this might be. What would be fueling that exactly? And it began to occur to me that quite possibly this character could be somebody that today we would understand as neurodivergent. And it was very interesting to me to ask what it would be like for a neurodivergent person in that era. There would be things that would be much more difficult. For one, nobody has this frame of reference. None of the characters can possibly think of it that way. That's just not a categorization that exists for them. So that makes things hard. His oddities are looked at as him willfully being strange, not having different needs. But on the other hand, I thought, not everybody, but many neurodivergent people very much like to have a routine and set expectations. And the gentry in the Regency era, every day you could know more or less what was going to take place. Even when there would be a deviation from the daily routine, say a country dance, you would know the dances that were going to happen. You'd know probably, a possible order. You'd know exactly when somebody was going to touch you during the steps, et cetera. And with things like this, I thought that might actually have been, much easier in some ways, or at least easier to deal with day to day. So I thought, okay, I'll give this a try. I did a lot of research. I hope he came through well. We did have people read and check it through. Any errors still in the manuscript are my fault, but hopefully he comes through as the individual that he is, which is a really wonderful person. And I think believably Darcy and Elizabeth's son.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Now, if I understand correctly, The Murder of Mr. Wickham is your first foray into mysteries.
Yes.
Is it your first historical kind of novel?
No, actually. I did write a young adult historical. It was a paranormal historical, but still a historical. And some of my other paranormal, even though it wasn't set long ago, there would be flashbacks and history sequences, because when you have vampires and ghosts, they've been around a while. So I did have some of that. It was definitely my first mystery. And I already greatly loved Agatha Christie, but I developed an entirely new level of respect when I realized how hard it is, how many moving parts there are, and how absolutely effortless she makes it look every single time. It's astonishing. I think you get the right level of admiration when you try to do it and you're like, oh, this is much, much harder than it looks. And I didn't think it was going to be easy.
No, I think you've pretty much nailed that. I think Christie does sometimes get a bum rap from critics because they just see the end product. They don't realize what's involved in creating that. But you really do have to work at putting those clues in, getting the suspects in the right place, if you want it all to appear seamless, which it does in The Murder of Mr. Wickham. It's a very tightly knit story, and you can see how each person could be a suspect, and yet you have to find the one that does it in the end. The
That's a
historical
relief
side,
here.
when you're creating your Star Wars books, you're working within a world. When you're creating YAs, you're creating universes and characters there. But when it comes to history, you have to do, I'm guessing you had to do some research about the Regency era.
Some. Being a huge Austen fan and nerd before I ever began this helped a lot. I already owned several books that talked about different background things that might be happening. I have a couple of cookbooks. I had an Austen party a few years ago where we made syllabubs and rook cakes and seed cake and had period music and lit candles, the whole thing, and really had fun with it. So I already had some of that. I did have to do more research, and sometimes it was very difficult to get exactly the bit of information that I wanted, or sometimes even though it is our real world, there are certain points that are a little bit unclear with the passage of time, and different experts, people who are very, very educated in this area, they may still disagree on a couple of points. So, you just have to pick what seems most reasonable and rational to you and not wander too far into the unknown wilderness and look out for it. I mean, I'm sure there's probably something. I do know the advanced reader copy, we had to make one correction because I got confused on the correct form of address for a baronet, which, I mean, who hasn't? But it was one of those things. What gets you, and this is true with everything, not just historical research, but all research, it's not what you're aware you don't know. It's what you think you know that you don't know. That's what trips you up every time.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I've heard other authors say when it comes to historical research and writing books in the past, it's the small details that are the hardest to find. You can find out things about wars and coronations and all that, but how people serve soup might be something that was more of a mystery, and you just have to go with what seems logical and true to you as a writer.
Yes, there are many, many authoritative, definite accounts of what you would have at a country house party breakfast, and they are not the same. They are not the same. Presumably different houses did things slightly differently. I don't know why we think that would necessarily be so much different than it is today. I mean, people did conform more to certain mores, but I don't think it's beyond reason to say different people might have different preferences at breakfast that were still within the form of what was correct.
And I'm not sure this necessarily applies, but I was fascinated by reading something you had written when you're writing your other books about things being open canon and closed canon.
Yes.
Would Jane Austen's books be considered closed canon?
Yes, they would. If you take as canon only what she wrote and what has been published, and I'm just counting the 6 books here, not Lady Susan or Love and Friendship or the Watsons or Sanditon. That's all that there is. Now, there's a little bit extra in the Austen family letters and certain Austen family remembrances. There are notes where she would say, oh, this is what I think happened to this character. For instance, Mary was supposed to just wind up with one of her Uncle Phillips's clerks. That was supposed to be that. I didn't wind up having that be Mary's destiny, but I had a flashback to her mother trying to get Uncle Phillips to find one of his clerks. That was a nod to sort of her references, but they're not canon, unless she comes back and does the authoritative, this is what happened, then there's nothing else. Star Wars was fairly closed for a while, and then, whoa, all of a sudden there's new movies and there's TV shows, and now it's open and things are going all over the place. The X-Files, for instance, was closed for a very long time, and then about 5 years ago, suddenly we got 2 more seasons. It's that sort of thing. But yeah, Jane Austen canon is closed, and it is kind of great. I mean, I enjoy writing Star Wars, but I'm always having to look up this kind of spaceship or that kind of blaster, et cetera. It's like, oh, it's so great that it's just our world 200 years ago. It's such a relief.
And I thought it was interesting. I didn't realize it, but it's not unexpected that for your Star Wars books, there's like a whole department that's keeping you and every other author and contributor on track because they all have to mesh.
Yeah, they do. And also they just know this more than anybody can know it. It's really wonderful to be able to just put a note in there. It's like, I need a species with fur and 4 arms. And it comes back and they put it in the notes. It's like, oh, there's that. And they say where it showed up before. And sometimes I get a little image of what it looks like. You can ask about the best kind of ship for something. And because you've literally had some of the world's best artists and model makers and everything else working on this for more than 40 years, you get blueprints, that kind of thing, which is really amazing. But it's a lot. It's a lot. But yes, more power to them. I don't know how we could get through that without them. There is no group that's going to help you with that with Jane Austen. No one thing. But luckily, she has so many fans on the internet, and there's so many wonderful blogs and so many books out there. It's been a while since I hung out there, but I spent several years at a fan site called the Republic of Pemberley.
Yeah.
Loved that place. I was told about it by somebody I sat next to on a plane. And we bumped into each other there periodically for years. So I was able to just call on things in the real world to provide that context.
Yeah, it's interesting how those worlds kind of overlap. Someone recently said there's a new historical Regency writers group that formed this year. So that may spin off the kind of collaborations that you get with your other kinds of fan fiction.
Maybe. It is fun.
What was, I guess, one of the biggest challenges when writing The Murder of Mr. Wickham for you, or was it just a breeze?
The biggest challenge was, it's not just a mystery. It is, to some extent, a mini sequel to 5 of the 6 books. We know that Henry and Catherine are married and they've had Juliet and some other children, but they are not present. But we're catching up with the Darcys, the Brandons, etc. And there's a note in the beginning of the book. I placed the books through the Regency era in roughly the order that they were written. I did cheat a little bit. I moved Sense and Sensibility from the beginning to the end of sort of this 20-year period. But that let me catch up with them at different points in their lives and see how things were going. And Jane Austen was very wise about human character. Everybody comes to terms with their flaws in the books, but that doesn't mean that those flaws necessarily go away completely. They tend to recur, but more subtly, with more complexity. And so we have a situation in which Darcy and Elizabeth are experiencing some trouble in their marriage because they've been through something very difficult. And Elizabeth is deeply distraught, and Darcy is very much controlling his emotions. And so she feels that he has become distant from her in this way, because we know that Darcy can react like that. We know that he can. And more immediately, I think everybody sort of wonders, how does this go with Marianne and Colonel Brandon from Sensibility? What is the early stage of their marriage like? When exactly is she falling in love with him, and why and how? So by putting that only a few months after their marriage, I was able to get in and explore that. So it was balancing all those different characters and all those different stories, because each of them has a journey that they go on through the book while Jonathan and Juliet are tracking down the killer.
And if that wasn't enough, then you also have to kind of capture Austen's voice too in your writing, which is another challenge. And I think there were some wonderful moments in there, and I'm paraphrasing because I wrote it down and then forgot to bring it with me. But at one point, a character says to another that people love being listened to more than they enjoy listening, or something like that. Those little things like that are just so Austen-esque. You just think that's what she was doing in her writing. So did you go back and reread her works? Is that how you kind of tried to get yourself into the frame of reference?
I mean, I was rereading them, but to be honest with you, before the Libby app, which I only got onto maybe 3 years ago, before that, the only ebooks I had on my phone were the 6 Austen novels. And anytime I was in a line or on a plane or whatever, I would read one. And when I got to the end of one, I'd go find the one I hadn't read in the longest, read that. I mean, for years, I was reading one of them all of the time. I make no pretense to actually capturing Austen's voice because her wit
Mhm.
and her incisiveness is just unparalleled. But I hoped it could at least not be an offensive imitation of it. That was really my only goal, that it would be plausible, because she was the genius in that regard.
You know, it's obvious your love for Austen definitely shines through the book, and you have some very memorable turns there. Is it fair to ask you, as a reader, do you have your own favorite among her novels? And if so, which one is it? And why would you push that one as being number one?
I mean, this is one of those unanswerable questions. I think,
Yeah.
like almost everybody, the one that I find the most enjoyable and in some ways the most revolutionary is Pride and Prejudice. But I'm most moved, for instance, by Persuasion.
Mhm.
Not only in terms of the story, which is, it's an older story. The characters are older. What they've been through, they've experienced more of life. And also, just if you look at the style, the differences in style between Sense and Sensibility and Persuasion, it is astonishing how far Jane Austen had progressed. And there are sections in Persuasion that almost read like 20th century writing.
Mhm.
And it really just breaks my heart every time, because it makes me wonder, if she'd had another 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, where would she have gone? It just gets to me. The one I probably wind up picking at the most is Mansfield Park. I think
Really?
most Austen fans would agree that's the one where she doesn't quite stick the landing.
Mhm.
Only one. But that factor alone means that you keep digging into it and parsing it out. And it's also the one, I think, where her rogue is the most, the two rogues, the Crawford siblings, they're very engaging, entertaining characters.
Mhm.
And even while you see, that they have unsuitable morals, you can't help but being interested in them. And Austen wants you to be interested in them. Mary's jokes are inappropriate, but there really can't be much doubt that Austen enjoyed making them. So that's always fun to play with. But I love them all. They're all fantastic. That was a real bunt of a conclusion there.
No, I think you probably have said what many Austen readers have said. It's
Mhm.
like picking your favorite flavor of candy or something like that. You just can't choose one.
Mhm.
Austen's also inspired, in addition to yours, a number of different homages, both literary, cinematic,
Mhm.
things like that. Do you have any one or any several that you think are particularly successful for you?
Are you talking about adaptations of
Adaptations, yeah.
adaptations? Oh, I have strong feelings about my favorite adaptations of each one. Nobody's fully nailed Mansfield Park. There have been two good
Yeah.
versions that each have a lot to recommend them, but don't quite hit it. Obviously, I'm a Colin Firth, Jennifer Ailey purist with a 95, Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Ang Lee's Sense and Sensibility. I should maybe also say Emma Thompson's Sense and Sensibility. I think that's a very intelligent adaptation. It embroiders only where it most needs to embroider. Edward doesn't have a whole lot of personality in the book, so that is brought to life. And it's very witty and light and clever. I also like, there's, I think it was 1982 or so, sort of the either late 70s or early 80s BBC version of Sense and Sensibility is also very good. Let's see what else. That Northanger Abbey with J.J. Field and Felicity Jones. Oh my gosh, that is wonderful. And that was a really hard one to film, I think.
Yeah.
Have you seen the one from the 80s that is like a Eurythmics video on acid? I mean, kudos to them. They went for it, but it is really weird. The most modern one, and with Carey Mulligan as Isabella, that one is fantastic. Let's see, I love Roma Garai's Emma. I was not a big fan of this most recent Emma for long and elaborate reasons that I will get to discuss in an event sometime, but will not subject you all to here. Gosh, hold on, I'm trying to think. Yeah, it's better still, though, than there was, again, one from about 1981 or so with the BBC where it's very, very strangely cast. Very strangely yes. But all of those, I think, everything's gotten a really good adaptation except Mansfield Park. I think the sort of revisionist one from the 90s comes really close. And it is revisionist in the extreme, but I think it's fair, the majority of it. But the only problem is they take out Fanny Price and they put in a Jane Austen insert as the main character. But the events that unfold and the actions taken don't make any sense for a Jane Austen insert. Fanny is a difficult character to write, as I found out in this. She's very passive. She's very frail. She's very timid, all of which are things we don't want main characters to be any longer. So digging in and making her interesting, it is tougher. But you can't replace her, else the story kind of falls apart.
And do you
That's
think?
a really long answer, sorry.
No, that was wonderful. And I totally agree with you. I do think Gwyneth Paltrow's Emma was probably the best.
I like that one. I prefer the Romola Garai just because they really have the time and space to get into it. And I thought Michael Gambon was kind of a revelation as Emma's father. And he takes something that was purely comic in most versions of Emma, and you actually see, like, you know, this man's anxiety, like he's actually really in a lot of pain. He's very frightened. And Emma, part of why she's such the queen of her little castle is because she's never going to be allowed to leave it. She can't leave her father, whom she loves dearly, because he's so afraid. And I think the fact that they got into that was excellent. That said, I do enjoy a lot of the Gwyneth Paltrow, particularly their Knightley.
Yes. Now, this has been your first mystery. Do you have plans for another?
More than plans. I am actually editing the sequel to The Murder of Mr. Wickham right now. I don't know if this will be the final title, but I bet it will. And it is called The Late Mrs. Willoughby.
Oh, that's great.
Yes. So that was fun. It will take place in the world of Sense and Sensibility, obviously.
We do have a couple of questions from people tuning in.
Okay.
So time for those. Someone would like to know, what kind of relationship do you have with social media as an author? Do you have favorite platforms?
It's bristlier than it used to be. I didn't leave Twitter. There's still a Twitter account, but my assistant keeps it up. I did it just for a short period of time to kind of clear my head, and then began to realize, oh, life is beautiful once again. So I've kept away from that. I am medium active on Instagram, although you're also going to get a lot of pictures of my dogs, so be ready. But they're cute dogs, so you should be fine with that. And I do have a Tumblr, which is really like me and the dozens of other people still on Tumblr, but it's the same goofy humor there as ever. And I speak Tumblr, so I enjoy that one. But yeah, my assistant keeps up the Facebook and Twitter, so that hopefully through those different forms, you're going to be able to catch up with me. But I definitely have gotten out of the path of really, it just felt like we were being encouraged to overshare as currency. You know, there was an entangling of the personal and the professional that I realized that at a certain point, for me at least, I'm sure it's not true for everybody, but for me at least, it really wasn't healthy. And it really influenced my connection to media, because I wasn't having my own reaction to something. I was reacting to somebody's reaction to somebody's reaction to somebody's reaction. And I wanted my unfiltered experience back. That doesn't mean I don't go and look for critical voices or reviews or thoughts on stuff that really interests me. I do. But I needed to take a step back from that. And I am heartily glad that I did. That said, you can still find where my appearances are and when my releases are if you check out the social media platforms that are out there.
That's great. I think you're right. It seems like over the decades, the relationship between an author and their readers, initially we knew nothing about authors. They might go on tour periodically, but their personal life was a mystery. Then it swung full pendulum to where their day-to-day movements were being tracked, and hopefully it's going back a little bit more towards the glamour and the mystery of not exactly knowing who they are.
I don't know if glamour is exactly what I've got going on here, but I am happier doing it this way.
Another question is, you've talked about Austen cinematic adaptations that are historically accurate. Do you have any modern interpretations of her works that you enjoy?
Yes, and am I completely blanking out on all of them ever at this moment? Yes.
I'm thinking Clueless.
There are, though.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, oh, I did love, and I'm still trying to get my husband to watch, he loves Jane Austen, but he has not yet seen the Lizzie Bennet Diaries. I thought that was delightful, really ingeniously done. It's the only version of Pride and Prejudice ever that went to the trouble of making the Bennet sisters look like sisters. I thought it was really a clever thought. The fact that the story fits into the medium of Lizzie having a YouTube channel, that it works that smoothly. I thought that that was great.
One other question says, you've mentioned Agatha Christie as being a favorite mystery writer. Do you have other mystery writers who've inspired you, influenced you, whom you love?
The one I've followed the most, with the most dedication, would be Jacqueline Winspear. I'm a big Maisie Dobbs fan. It's hard to put my finger on exactly why, but that first book, Maisie, just grabbed my heart. I loved that character. I still do. And I love the fact that she digs really deep into her sleuth character, all of the suspects. They're these beautiful, moody, period pieces. And it really captures so much of that, first sort of the sorrow and the wildness and all the other things that are following World War I. And then as you keep following the series, the dread of World War II is beginning to creep more and more as it becomes more and more obvious that this is going to happen. I just thought not only the mysteries very good, which they are, but I think she did an amazing job of really weaving the mystery in with the period, in with really deep categorization. And there's that weird little paranormal note to it that's so small. And it's such a strange but awesome choice for her to make, to have something that's a little bit paranormal as an element in the stories, but not have that be the dominant and defining part of it. So.
Another question from Kathy is, are you a member of the Jane Austen Society of North America?
I am not. I should be, but I'm not. They have a really big convention meeting very close to where I live. And like every year for however many years running, I was somewhere else the week it was going to happen. And then, of course, the last 2 years we were all inside our houses. It's one of those things I think is inevitable in my life, but it has not happened yet.
Another person asks, what have you discovered about Jane Austen as a writer that surprised you the most?
As a writer? That's actually a really interesting question, because I've done a lot of reading about her, and different things that I've learned about her life have been of interest to me. But as a writer, I guess it would be the thing that I talked about earlier about how much her style did evolve. We talk about Austen-esque prose, but Sense and Sensibility and Persuasion, they're not the same. There's been a really, really dramatic shift in the interiority of the characters. Anne's physical reactions when she's first face to face with Wentworth after so many years, and she can't look quite at him. I mean, that passage, that's unbelievable. And it's also so in the body. Whereas Sense and Sensibility, you barely know that people have hands or skin. Everything is very, very, very contained. But so I guess as a writer, the main thing would be like how much she had evolved. Not saying that what she did before was bad in any sense, because it clearly was not. But it's very interesting to me that she was still growing. She was still pushing herself. She was still thinking, and very independently and very much ahead of her time.
Judith asks, have you seen Lost in Austen?
Yes, I have. That one I mostly really enjoyed. I kind of didn't by the main character, because the idea is that she loves Jane Austen, but all of a sudden she doesn't know how to, adapt at all. I mean, you wouldn't know exactly, but you'd be like, yeah, they don't want to see me in my jeans, probably. That's, But I loved the insight on the characters. I love the idea that Wickham actually, he's like, hey, look at this from my angle. And it wasn't that strange an angle. And I like the fact that Lizzie got into our modern times and found a job as an au pair and was sort of like, nope, not going back. I like this just fine. So yes, I did enjoy that more than not. Even if I didn't agree with every single twist or turn of it, I thought it showed a real love for the material and a lot of imagination.
Another viewer asks, what do you know now as a writer that you wish you could go back in time and tell yourself when you were first starting out?
What I would definitely tell myself, I know this, as a big science fiction fantasy fan, we as a fan culture, we tend to really worship the idea of they knew it all along. They had it all planned out, all 7 seasons. They knew from the beginning what the last episode, the last scene would be, or when he began this 9-book cycle, he knew what the last page would read. Like, we tend to really, really lionize that. And I thought I was being so smart when I got my first contract. For young adult at that point, they really wanted series. So my very first contract was a multi-book contract. And I thought I was so smart. And I came up with this plot that would span the 4 books. It was like, oh, look at me. And then, very shortly into writing the second book, I was like, why did I think I was never going to have another idea? Like, why did I not understand that spending more time in this world with these characters would generate not just more, but better ideas? But I had locked myself in the way that I had plotted it. I was able to modify a little bit. For the most part, I had to just keep going on. And, that was a difficult lesson to learn. Some of my second series, it was a trilogy, and it was like, the villain's plan has 3 parts. We'll worry about the first part in book 1. And I knew roughly what the end goal was, and I trusted myself to come up with that as I went. Now, this is applicable to different books in varying ways. You very much need to know where you're going with a mystery, for instance. But trusting yourself, not assuming that you're going to be able to plan your way out of every difficulty. Because sort of the flip side of that is you outline something to death and then you hit a snag, something in the outline doesn't work the way that you wanted it to work. It can really throw you off. It doesn't do that to me as much anymore, because I'm like, right, okay, that's not working the same way on the page. Of course, we move around it. So I would tell myself, trust yourself to stay in the story and to work with the story, have an end goal in sight, but leave room for the creation that's going to happen along the way.
Oh, that's smart. I think we have time for one more question. I'm going to insert that because it's fiercely debated here at the Poison Pen. The new PBS Sanditon series, yes or no?
I've only seen season 1. We're holding on season 2. My husband and I were kind of waiting until we have a minute where we can sort of sit down and relax and enjoy this. Maybe, I don't know. Let's put it this way. I really enjoyed season 1, but I did not connect to it as a Jane Austen story, fundamentally. To me, it seemed like a period story that had the occasional touch of Jane Austen about it. And if I looked at it that way, then I was perfectly able to enjoy myself. Of course, there were some little historical inaccuracies, like the silly stuff. It's like her hair, the hair out, just little things like that. But I found that if I wasn't trying to make it be like, definitely this is what Jane Austen would have done, if I didn't try to put that frame around it, I was able to enjoy it on its merits. I don't know what season 2 holds. We'll find out.
Well, that's a very smart and diplomatic answer, and you've used both sides of the bookstore debate here.
Yeah.
I can't believe time has flown by so quickly. Our guest author at the Poison Pen today has been Claudia Gray, whose new book is The Murder of Mr Wickham. It's a fabulous book for mystery fans, for Austen fans, for anyone who just wants an enjoyable trip back to Regency England with a body thrown in for good measure.
Listen to the man.
Claudia, I'd like to thank you for taking time to be with us today. I'm delighted you have a second book in the works, and I'd like to thank those listening in for joining us for another virtual author event at the Poison Pen Bookstore.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, and in case I click the wrong button and lose you, Claudia, because I'm not our tech person, we're delightful. I just really enjoyed your questions and answers and everything. You're just fabulous.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun, and I was very glad people had questions.
Yeah, that was interesting too. And I can't wait for the second book. I'll have to put it on my calendar.
Fantastic. I think it's going to be in June of 2023.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And this is the perfect amount of time because one of my fellow Star Wars writers has one of his original books debuting the same day as Wickham, but his book event is tonight. So now I can run out the door and make that.
There you go. And if you're ever in Scottsdale, please, we'd love to have you stop by the Poison Pen.
That would be awesome.
Do an